we are going to be using ACES together with the OCIO nodes inside of Fusion. And if you don't have the ACES config files already downloaded, you might want to navigate to SPI's GitHub page, the OpenColorIO section, and download their entire repository. I'll provide a link in the description below. Now, I've already downloaded the zip file containing the entire repository and extracted it here in the downloads folder. And there's a folder inside here called ACES 1.0.3, and there's a file in here called config.ocio, and that's the one that gives us the specification, or rather the implementation of this version of ACES inside of OCIO. So let's open up Fusion and see the various ways that we can utilize OCIO. The first place you're going to encounter OCIO is in the Color tab inside of Fusion. You'll find the OCIO CDL Transform node, the OCIO Color Space, and the OCIO File Transform node. We're going to be looking at the Color Space one for now. Fusion ships with a bunch of default settings for transforming some rather standard color spaces. For instance, you'll have the Panavision log function, the Alexa log C function, standard Rec 709 profile, and these are quite handy, but we're interested in using the OCIO standard. Now, if you navigate to the download folder and you go into the ACES 1.0.3, you'll find the config.ocio file here. And now we'll have the option of selecting from a large variety of different color spaces. Now, it supports input and output transformations and as well as looks, but currently there's no looks installed. The other place you're going to encounter the OCIO nodes in Fusion is through the viewer LUT function. So if you create a gradient and click the LUT button, we can now set the OCIO color space viewer LUT to be enabled, and we'll click edit, and you'll see that we'll have the same standard options, but if we select the config file, we now have the same selection. So for instance, let's say we're looking at a linear image with an sRGB primary, but we want to output the thing to Rec 709 and have that as our display profile, then that is one way of doing it. If you want to set this as a default, you can do that by right-clicking in the viewer and going settings, save defaults, or save new. If you want to create various different profiles, you can do that. There are also other ways of creating defaults in Fusion. Now, this is one way of setting the config file. It's a little bit annoying that you have to set it per node or per viewer. Now, there's another way of doing this as well. So let's have a look at using environment variables from your operating system to set the OCIO config file for many applications. Before we launch Fusion now, we're going to set an environment variable where we explicitly point to this config file. So we're going to export the variable OCIO, and we're going to point it to the home directory, user, download, OpenColorIO master, and we'll then select the ACES 1.0.3, and lastly we'll do config OCIO. Now, if we now launch Fusion, let's do the same thing as before. We'll put down a OCIO color space node. You'll see now that the environment variable has told Fusion to use this config file by default, so you'll have all these options available to you without having to select the file explicitly. Now, the same is true if we do the gradient yet again, and we'll have a look at the lookup table, and we'll see that we'll have the same options here. So it's a pretty good way of making sure that your environment that you're working in is using the correct version of ACES. So if you're working on multiple projects, multiple films, you want to make sure that you're loading the correct config file. The added benefit of using it as an environment variable is that a lot of applications actually support OCIO. So for instance, Blender is one of them, and if you go to the color management section of Blender in an environment that has been launched with the OCIO environment set, you can now see that we have the same options as we had in Fusion. And this is also true for Nuke and Houdini. It's a great way to make sure that when it comes to handling color, you're all doing it within the same environment. I hope this video was useful, and thanks for watching.